The dark truth of J.P. Morgan, the man who didn't just make money, he controlled it. You clicked this video because you've seen the title, J.P. Morgan, the man who controlled money. And that's exactly what we're about to uncover. This isn't just a story about a banker. It's a story about power. Power so great that it bent governments, bailed out nations, and rewrote the very rules of capitalism. But here's the twist. J.P. Morgan wasn't elected. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even the richest man of his era. Yet somehow, this one individual managed to pull the strings of America's financial system, leaving even presidents indebted to him. How does one man do that? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the money in your pocket today? I've spent countless hours digging through history's archives, business journals, and the hidden corners of Morgan's empire to bring you the untold story. And by the end of this video, you'll see how J.P. Morgan didn't just change banking. He engineered a system that still shapes your life right now, every time you swipe a card or deposit a paycheck. In this video, we'll explore how Morgan rose from a privileged but awkward beginning into the most feared man on Wall Street. We'll uncover his ruthless business tactics, his stranglehold on industries from railroads to steel, and the shocking moment he single-handedly saved and controlled the United States economy during the Panic of 1907. We'll expose the darker side of his empire, the monopolies, the manipulation, the political puppeteering. And finally, we'll ask the big question: was J.P. Morgan the ultimate financial savior, or the original villain of capitalism?
Before J.P. Morgan became the man who controlled money, he was simply John Pierpont Morgan, born in 1837 to a wealthy banker father. Unlike the rags-to-riches tales of other Gilded Age tycoons, Morgan's story began with privilege. His father, Junius Morgan, was already a powerful figure in international banking, with strong ties to London financiers. That gave young JP a golden ticket into the world of money long before he earned a single dollar of his own. But privilege doesn't always mean ease. Morgan's childhood was marked by illness. He suffered from seizures, rheumatic fever, and recurring skin infections. For much of his youth, he was isolated, often seen as shy, awkward, even frail. Nobody could have predicted that this reserved boy would grow into the most intimidating banker Wall Street had ever seen. His education, however, was his secret weapon. Morgan studied in Boston, then Switzerland, and later Germany. He absorbed mathematics, finance, and European business culture at a time when America was still rough and chaotic. While other American businessmen were scrambling with little formal training, Morgan was learning how European empires ran their financial machines. By his early 20s, Morgan was already working in New York banking houses. And here's where the legend began. While other young men his age were chasing comfort, Morgan was chasing opportunity. He had an eye for risk, but unlike gamblers, he knew how to bend the odds in his favor. His first big move? During the Civil War, he financed the sale of rifles to the Union Army. Some called it profiteering, others called it genius. Either way, Morgan proved he wasn't just his father's son, he was a force in his own right. From there, Morgan built a reputation as a man who could be trusted with money. Not because he was kind, not because he was generous, but because he always got results. He understood that in banking, reputation is currency, and he guarded his like gold. By the time America entered its industrial boom, J.P. Morgan was perfectly positioned. He had European training, a wealthy family network, and a razor-sharp instinct for where power truly lived. Not in factories, not in steel mills, not even in railroads, but in the flow of money itself. Whoever controlled the money, controlled everything. And Morgan wasn't about to let anyone else take that throne. In the next chapter, we'll see how he went from a well-bred banker's son to a monopolist kingmaker, crushing competitors and rewriting the rules of American capitalism in the process. By the late 1800s, America was exploding with industry. Railroads stitched the country together, steel built its cities, electricity promised to conquer the night. But chaos lurked beneath the progress. Companies were failing, markets were volatile, competition was brutal. And into that chaos stepped J.P. Morgan, not as a builder, not as an inventor, but as the man who would consolidate, control, and ultimately dominate. Morgan understood something most men didn't. Competition wasn't efficient, it was dangerous. Railroads cut each other's prices, drove themselves into bankruptcy, and ruined investors. So Morgan did what Morgan always did. He imposed order. He invited railroad owners into plush hotel rooms, locked the doors, and forced them to make deals. Rival companies were merged into giant monopolies, with Morgan pulling the strings. It was called Morganization, a polite word for crushing rivals until they played by his rules. Critics called him a tyrant, but Wall Street called him a savior. Because every time Morgan stepped in, profits stabilized, investors breathed easier, and money flowed again. He wasn't just managing railroads, he was managing capitalism itself, and railroads were only the beginning. Morgan had bigger prey in sight: steel. The future of America's skyscrapers, bridges, and weapons depended on it. One man controlled the steel industry, Andrew Carnegie. But Carnegie was restless, unpredictable, and nearing retirement. Morgan saw his chance. In 1901, Morgan struck one of the biggest deals in history. He bought Carnegie Steel for $480 million, an unimaginable fortune at the time. Out of it, he created U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in America. One company, one empire, with Morgan at the helm.
With that move, Morgan didn't just consolidate an industry, he consolidated power. U.S. Steel controlled more than 60% of America's steel production. Bridges, battleships, skyscrapers, they all carried Morgan's invisible signature. And just like that, the man who never built a single railroad track or poured a single ingot of steel became the architect of America's industrial future. But this kind of power comes at a price. To some, Morgan was a genius who brought stability to a young nation. To others, he was a monopolist, strangling free competition. The government was starting to take notice, and soon Morgan's empire would face challenges not just from competitors, but from Washington itself.
By the dawn of the 20th century, J.P. Morgan was no longer just a financier, he was the financial system. When Wall Street trembled, the world turned to him, and time after time, he answered, not with speeches, not with politics, but with money, power, and sheer will. In 1895, the U.S. government itself was on the verge of collapse. Gold reserves had fallen so low, America risked defaulting on its debt. Confidence was evaporating. The dollar was in free fall. And who came to the rescue? Not the president, not Congress, but J.P. Morgan. From his private library, he negotiated a secret deal with President Grover Cleveland. Morgan and his partners would supply $62 million in gold to stabilize the treasury. One man bailed out the United States. This was more than finance. It was dominance. Morgan didn't just save the economy. He proved that his power was greater than Washington's. When the government wavered, Morgan acted, and the markets bowed to him. Then came 1907. A financial panic erupted. Banks failed. Trust companies collapsed. Stocks plummeted. Fear spread like wildfire. There was no Federal Reserve back then, no central bank to step in. So who did America turn to? Once again, J.P. Morgan. Morgan summoned the nation's top bankers to his mansion. He locked the doors, and he wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to a rescue plan. Millions of dollars were pledged. Banks were stabilized. The stock market rebounded. And once again, a single man saved capitalism from implosion. But this time, something changed. People began to realize, no democracy should rely on the personal fortune of one man to keep its economy alive. Morgan's dominance during the Panic of 1907 was the final push that led to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Ironically, by saving the system, Morgan also ensured that no one man would ever wield that kind of unchecked power again. Morgan had become the nation's financial titan, the man presidents called before Congress did. But behind his stone face and iron grip lay controversy, enemies, and whispers of corruption. Because absolute power always breeds suspicion. By the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan was untouchable. He commanded industries, rescued governments, and bent Wall Street to his will. But the higher his empire rose, the more it attracted suspicion. To critics, Morgan wasn't a savior. He was a dictator in a banker's suit, a man who controlled America without ever standing for election. Magazines and newspapers painted him as a financial overlord. His monopolies, railroads, steel, banking, weren't just businesses. They were seen as chains around the neck of the American economy. And ordinary people were asking, if Morgan can decide whether the nation prospers or collapses, then who really runs America? The people, or one banker? The U.S. government finally pushed back. In 1912, the Pujo Committee, a congressional investigation, set out to expose the so-called money trust, a small circle of Wall Street bankers accused of controlling credit, currency, and entire industries. And at the very center of their crosshairs stood J.P. Morgan. Morgan was summoned to testify. Lawmakers grilled him on monopolies, corruption, and his stranglehold over the economy. His defense? A simple creed. A man I do not trust could not get money from me on all the bonds in Christendom. In other words, finance wasn't about law, it was about trust. His trust. To many, this was proof of arrogance. A man who believed his personal judgment outweighed democracy itself. But to his allies, it was honesty. They argued Morgan had stabilized a chaotic system no one else could control. Was he a villain or the only adult in the room? Still, the whispers never stopped. Conspiracies spread. Some said Morgan deliberately fueled panics so he could step in as savior. Others believed he was part of a secret cabal of bankers pulling the strings of nations. Whether truth or rumor, one thing was clear: J.P. Morgan had become more than a man. He was a symbol, the embodiment of the fear that money itself had replaced democracy as the true ruler of America.
In March 1913, the man who controlled money drew his last breath. J.P. Morgan died while traveling in Rome at the age of 75. The world's most feared banker, gone. But his death raised a question that echoed louder than the toll of church bells. What happens when a man who held the strings of nations is suddenly no longer there to pull them? When his body was returned to America, thousands lined the streets to watch. Some mourned, others cheered. To his allies, Morgan had been a stabilizer, the man who saved the economy time and again. To his critics, he was the symbol of unchecked greed, a robber baron cloaked in respectability. But here's the twist. For all his fortune and influence, J.P. Morgan wasn't the richest of his era. His estate, valued at around $80 million, was a fraction of what men like Andrew Carnegie or John D. Rockefeller left behind. The difference? Morgan didn't measure his wealth in dollars. He measured it in power, influence, control. And his power didn't vanish with him. The institutions he built, J.P. Morgan and Company, U.S. Steel, General Electric, outlived him, shaping industries for generations. His influence stretched beyond money. The very creation of the Federal Reserve was a direct response to his dominance. America had designed a central bank not to replace Wall Street, but to prevent another Morgan from ever holding such sway over the nation's fate. In the century since his death, the Morgan name has become more than a man. It's become a dynasty. The modern giant J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest financial institutions in the world, still bears his mark. Every time money moves, through banks, credit, or the stock market, his legacy whispers in the background. The system he helped forge is the system we still live in. But before we close, there's one final chapter to uncover. Because history never paints men like J.P. Morgan in simple black and white. Was he a ruthless monopolist who strangled freedom? Or was he the indispensable titan who saved capitalism from itself? The truth, like money, depends on who controls it. History remembers J.P. Morgan in contradictions. To some, he was the guardian of capitalism,
the man who stood between America and financial ruin. To others, he was the robber baron of banking, a monopolist who twisted democracy to serve the elite. So which is true? Was Morgan savior or villain? Supporters argue Morgan saved America twice. In 1895, when the Treasury was nearly bankrupt, and in 1907, when Wall Street teetered on collapse. Without Morgan's steady hand, they say, the US might not have survived to become the world's financial superpower. But his critics tell a darker tale. They argue Morgan didn't just rescue crises, he profited from them. That his monopolies crushed competition, silenced innovation, and concentrated wealth into fewer hands. That by controlling money itself, he undermined democracy and left ordinary Americans with no say in their own economy. The truth may be somewhere in between. J.P. Morgan was not a saint, nor was he simply a villain. He was a man of his time, the Gilded Age, when wealth and power operated in a gray zone between genius and corruption. He believed stability mattered more than fairness, and results mattered more than rules. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy both indispensable and deeply unsettling. So, savior or villain? The answer may depend on how you see the world. If you value order above all, Morgan was a savior. If you value freedom and competition, he was a villain. But either way, one fact is undeniable. Morgan proved that in America, money doesn't just talk, it rules. Over a century has passed since J.P. Morgan's death. Yet his shadow still lingers over every financial system in the world. His empire may be gone, but the lessons of his power remain, and they are more relevant today than ever. Lesson 1. Money is power. Morgan proved that those who control credit and capital often wield more influence than those who hold office. In today's world of trillion-dollar banks and global markets, that truth has only grown sharper. Lesson 2. Stability versus freedom. Morgan brought stability to a chaotic financial system, but at the cost of competition and fairness. Today, we face the same trade-offs, as governments and central banks wrestle with whether to let markets burn or step in to save them. Lesson 3. No one man should hold such power again. The Federal Reserve and modern financial regulations were created to prevent another Morgan from rising. And yet, the debates about too big to fail banks and corporate monopolies show us the struggle is far from over. J.P. Morgan's story isn't just history. It's a mirror, a reminder that money shapes nations, bends governments, and decides the fate of ordinary lives. The question is no longer whether one man can control money. The question is, who controls it now? If you found this story eye-opening, don't stop here. J.P. Morgan may be gone, but the questions his life raises still shape our world today. Who controls the money now? And what does that mean for your future? Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history of money and power. Leave a comment. Was Morgan a savior, a villain, or something in between? I'd love to hear your take. History doesn't just live in the past. It lives in your wallet, in your bank, in your every transaction. The story continues, and so should your curiosity.